The warehouse was busy as usual, with people walking in and out carrying boxes, carts rolling across the floor, and workers hurrying to keep everything in order. Among them was a man who had been working there for years. He was not someone who stood out much. He lived a simple life, worked hard every day, and never asked for more than what was fair. He knew the rules of the company very well. Stay at your post, follow orders, and don't interfere with anything that is not your job. But deep down, he also knew something more important than rules: being human, not helping when someone was in need. That afternoon, while he was stacking goods on the shelves, a loud noise broke through the usual routine. Something had fallen, and when he turned to look, he saw a customer struggling in pain. The customer had slipped, dropping a heavy item that injured their leg. People nearby froze for a moment, unsure what to do, but the worker didn't think twice. He rushed over, leaving his assigned spot behind. He bent down, asked if the person could move, and when they couldn't, he gently lifted them up. His arms shook under the weight, but he didn't care. All that mattered was getting them to safety. Some shoppers watched in surprise, and a few even pulled out their phones. The worker guided the injured customer to a bench, then called for medical help. He stayed right there, kneeling by their side, talking softly so they wouldn't feel alone until help arrived. The injured customer looked at him with tears in their eyes, whispering thank you again and again. The worker smiled, brushing it off, saying it was nothing. To him, it wasn't a heroic act. It was just the right thing to do. But not everyone saw it that way. His manager had been watching from a distance, arms folded tight, lips pressed in disapproval. Instead of seeing kindness, the manager saw broken rules. In that company, rules mattered more than anything else. The worker knew this, but in that moment, he couldn't imagine standing still while someone was in pain. He hoped maybe his manager would understand, that maybe this one time they would see it from the heart instead of the handbook. The paramedics soon arrived, thanked the worker for his quick actions, and took the customer away for further care. Other shoppers clapped lightly, admiring what they had just witnessed. Some even whispered to each other, "That's what a real human being does." The worker, however, quietly went back to his duties, not expecting any reward or recognition. For him, it was just another day where he tried to do what was right. Yet in his heart, a small worry began to grow. He had left his station, and he knew how his manager could be. He tried to shake the thought away, telling himself that surely helping someone in pain couldn't be a crime. But as the manager called him over later that evening, the look in their eyes made his stomach twist. There were no words of praise, no sign of respect, only cold silence and a warning tone. "We'll talk about this tomorrow," the manager said, and walked away. That night, the worker sat at home, replaying the moment in his mind. His family asked what was wrong, but he didn't want to worry them. He just smiled faintly and said he was tired. Deep inside, though, he knew the company might not see things his way. He wondered if doing the right thing would cost him the only job he had. As he looked at the ceiling before falling asleep, one thought stayed with him. If he had to choose again, he would still help. Because no rule in the world was more important than being there for someone who needed it. The next morning, he returned to work, still unsure of what would happen. The warehouse looked the same, the noise of carts and chatter filling the air, but something felt different. He could see a few co-workers glance at him, whispering quietly. Some nodded at him with respect, while others looked away, as if afraid to be caught supporting him. His heart pounded as he walked toward the manager's office, where he had been asked to report. He took a deep breath, knowing that no matter what happened next, he had acted with kindness. And sometimes, that is the only thing a person can hold on to when the world feels unfair. Morning sun felt heavier than usual as he walked into the warehouse, his steps slower, his heart heavy with thoughts he tried to push aside. He had hardly slept the night before, replaying the image of the injured customer and the way they had looked at him with gratitude. That memory was comforting, but it could not silence the fear of what was coming. The world outside seemed normal, the busy traffic, the chatter of people on the street, but inside him, nothing felt normal anymore. He knew today was not just another workday. It was the day he would learn the price of his choice. He entered the building quietly, as he always did. His uniform looked the same, his ID badge hung at his chest, but it felt as though the place itself was watching him. A few coworkers gave him sympathetic looks, some even patted his shoulder briefly, as though trying to pass on courage without saying anything out loud. Others avoided his eyes, worried that being too close to him might cause them trouble too. The warehouse was a place where most people kept their heads down and followed orders. They all knew how strict management could be. Everyone had heard stories of workers being punished for even small mistakes. So to step out of line for something as human as kindness, that was something the company would not easily forgive. Soon, his name was called, sharp and clear, echoing through the floor. He wiped his palms against his uniform, forcing himself to walk toward the office. The corridor seemed longer than ever, each step echoing with the weight of uncertainty. Inside, the manager sat behind a desk, papers stacked neatly, eyes cold and distant. There was no smile, no warmth, no acknowledgement of what had happened the day before. Just a stiff nod, followed by silence that made the air feel heavier. Finally, the manager spoke, the words clipped and sharp. "You abandoned your station yesterday." That was the first accusation. He opened his mouth to explain, to remind them that someone had been injured, that he had acted out of instinct and care. But the manager raised a hand, cutting him off. "You know the rules," the manager continued. "Leaving your post without authorization is unacceptable." The worker's chest tightened. He wanted to shout, to ask if rules were really more important than a person's safety. But he stayed quiet, his voice trapped by the fear of making things worse. The conversation did not last long. There was no real discussion, no chance for understanding. The decision had already been made before he even entered the room. A letter was slid across the desk toward him. He stared at it for a moment, his vision blurring. His hands trembled as he picked it up, reading the words he had feared. Termination. His job was gone. Years of hard work, long hours, and loyalty all erased with a single decision. He looked up, hoping for even a flicker of compassion, but the manager's face remained cold. It was not personal, they said, just policy. But to him, it was more than personal. It was his life, his livelihood, his dignity. He left the office slowly, each step heavier than the last. Some coworkers watched as he walked out, their eyes filled with quiet sympathy, but no one dared to speak up. In a place where rules ruled above all, silence was safer than standing beside him. He stepped outside the building, the letter still clutched in his hand, and for a moment, the world felt strange and distant. The noise of traffic, the voices of strangers, the hum of daily life, it all went on as if nothing had happened, while his life had just been turned upside down. When he reached home, his family saw the look on his face before he even spoke. His children ran up to him with their usual excitement, but the weight in his eyes made them pause. He sat down quietly, the letter in his hands, and explained what had happened. His family listened, their faces falling with each word. They told him he had done the right thing, that no decent person could have ignored someone in pain. But he couldn't stop thinking about the bills, the rent, the food they needed. Right and wrong felt clear in his heart, but survival was a different question. That night, he lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. His mind replayed the scene from the warehouse, the injured customer, the gratitude in their eyes, the sound of paramedics thanking him. Those moments reminded him that he had done what was right. And yet, the letter on the table downstairs was proof of what it had cost him. He felt anger rise inside him, anger at a system that punished kindness, anger at a company that saw people as numbers instead of human beings. But beneath the anger was also fear. He wondered how long they could manage without his paycheck, how soon the savings would run out, and what kind of future lay ahead. Still, even in his fear, there was a quiet sense of peace. Because deep down, he knew that if time turned back and he faced the same choice again, he would not change a thing. He would still have helped. He would still have lifted that injured customer and stayed by their side. He would still have chosen humanity over policy. Because that was who he was. And though he had lost his job, he had not lost his heart. The following day began with silence. The worker woke up later than usual, no alarm clock pulling him to rush for his shift. For the first time in years, there was no uniform waiting on the chair, no sense of duty pushing him out the door. He sat quietly at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in his hands, staring at the steam as it curled upward. His children whispered to each other, not sure why their father looked so lost. His partner tried to comfort him with soft words, but the weight of losing his job still pressed on his chest. He felt invisible, as if all those years of loyalty had been erased overnight. The world outside carried on as though nothing had happened. People were on their way to work. Buses rolled down the street, and the sound of car horns drifted in through the window. But he sat there, wondering how he would explain to his family that things might get harder now. What he didn't know was that while he sat in silence, the world had already started to take notice of what he had done. The customer he had carried to safety, the one who had been injured, had gone home shaken but deeply grateful. And among the crowd of shoppers who had witnessed it all, one had recorded the entire moment on their phone. The video wasn't polished, wasn't edited, it was raw, shaky, and real. It showed a man dropping everything to help someone in need. It showed kindness that seemed rare in a place where rules and money often mattered more than people. That video found its way onto social media. At first, only a few people saw it, leaving comments like, "This man is a hero, and how could anyone punish him for this?" But soon, the video was shared again and again. Within hours, it was spreading across platforms, gathering millions of views. People were tagging news channels, writing long posts about humanity, and calling him an example of what the world needed more of. Back at his small home, he was unaware of the storm brewing online. His phone buzzed a few times with notifications, but he ignored them, too drained to care. He thought they were just ordinary messages. He didn't realize that strangers from across the country were searching for him, trying to learn his name, trying to make sure his story was heard. By the afternoon, his family began to notice. His children came running into the room, shouting excitedly that they had seen a video of him on a neighbor's phone. At first, he didn't believe them. But when they pulled up the clip, he froze. There he was, in the middle of the warehouse, lifting the injured customer, staying by their side until help arrived. The video was short, but it carried a powerful message. He didn't see himself as special, but in those few seconds, millions of others saw something different. A man who chose kindness over fear. The comments were overwhelming. People were outraged that he had been fired. Words like unfair, heartless, and disgrace filled the screen. Others praised him, calling him a role model, saying the world needed more people like him. Journalists started contacting the person who posted the video, and soon articles appeared online with headlines about the warehouse worker who lost his job for doing the right thing. His partner showed him the messages pouring in. Some were from strangers offering financial help, others from people sharing their own stories of being punished for kindness. He sat in disbelief, struggling to understand how quickly everything had changed. Yesterday, he had walked out of the warehouse with his head down, feeling small and defeated. Today, people across the world were lifting him up with their words. Still, he remained quiet. He wasn't the kind of man who chased attention. He didn't want fame. He only wanted to take care of his family and live honestly. But there was no denying that something big was happening. His story was no longer his alone, it had become a symbol A reminder that sometimes ordinary people doing small acts of kindness can inspire millions. As evening came, his phone rang again and again, numbers he didn't recognize lighting up the screen. He hesitated to answer, not sure what to say. But deep down, he began to feel a small spark of hope. Maybe losing his job wasn't the end. Maybe, just maybe, this unexpected turn would lead him somewhere he could never have imagined. That night, as he sat with his family around the dinner table, their small home filled with laughter and warmth despite the uncertainty, he finally smiled. For the first time since everything had happened, he allowed himself to believe that something good might come from all of this. The world was watching, and it seemed like kindness was no longer something that could be ignored. The next morning began like the one before, with quiet stillness. The worker sat at the kitchen table again, a cup of tea warming his hands. But unlike yesterday, something was different. His phone had not stopped buzzing through the night. Messages, calls, and notifications filled the screen, and his children were wide-eyed with excitement as they scrolled through all the comments and posts. He still found it hard to believe that so many people, strangers from across the world, were speaking about him. A man who had simply chosen to help. At first, he wanted to ignore it all. Attention made him uneasy. He wasn't used to people talking about him, let alone praising him. But as the hours passed, the ringing of his phone grew louder and more persistent. Finally, he picked it up. On the other end was a calm, professional voice asking if they were speaking to the man in the video. He hesitated before answering yes. The caller introduced themselves as an assistant working for an executive of a large company. They explained that the executive had seen the video, had been deeply moved by his actions, and wanted to speak with him personally. The worker thought it was a prank. Why would someone so important call him, of all people? But before he could end the conversation, the assistant continued, saying their boss wanted to arrange a meeting as soon as possible. He was told not to worry about travel or expenses. Everything would be taken care of. He laughed nervously, not knowing what to believe. Then came the words that left him stunned. "A private jet will be sent for you tomorrow morning." He stared at the phone after the call ended, his mind racing. A private jet? That was something he had only seen in movies, not something that belonged in his world. His partner looked at him in shock, and his children cheered as though they had just heard the greatest news of their lives. But he still felt uncertain. Could this really be true? Or was it just a cruel joke? Later that evening, another call came, this time from someone higher up, confirming the details. They told him a car would arrive at his home the next morning to take him to the airport, where the jet would be waiting. They spoke with respect, not like the manager who had coldly dismissed him. They called him by his name, not just employee. For the first time in days he felt seen, as though someone understood the value of what he had done. That night, sleep did not come easily. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his heart pounding with nerves and questions. What did they want from him? Why would such powerful people take notice of an ordinary worker? Part of him was afraid of walking into something too big, afraid of being used as a story for their own gain. But another part of him, the part that remembered the gratitude in the injured customer's eyes, told him that maybe, just maybe, this was his chance. The next morning arrived, bright and clear. He dressed simply, the way he always did, and waited by the window. His children pressed their faces to the glass, whispering in excitement. And then, right on time, a sleek black car pulled up in front of their modest home. The driver stepped out, dressed neatly, and opened the door with a polite nod. The worker's hands trembled as he hugged his family, promising he would be back soon. As the car pulled away, he looked back at his home, wondering how much his life was about to change. The city blurred past the window until they arrived at the airport. He had expected to see a normal plane, but what stood before him left him speechless. There it was, a gleaming white jet, its polished surface shining in the sunlight, standing apart from the commercial planes. A crew member greeted him warmly, guiding him up the steps. For a moment, he felt out of place, like he had walked into someone else's life. Inside, the jet was elegant and quiet, with seats softer than anything he had ever touched. He sat down slowly, his mind struggling to catch up. The engine soon roared to life, and as the plane lifted off the ground, he looked out the window, watching his world grow smaller beneath him. Just 2 days ago, he had been standing in a warehouse, fearing for his job. Yesterday, he had been a man without work, feeling hopeless. And today, he was flying on a private jet, called by people he had never dreamed of meeting. As the jet soared through the clouds, he closed his eyes and let out a deep breath. He didn't know exactly what awaited him at the other end, but he knew this was more than luck. This was a reminder that sometimes, doing the right thing, even when it costs everything, can open doors no one could ever imagine. The jet touched down smoothly on a quiet runway, the sun casting a golden glow across the horizon. The worker sat by the window, his hands gripping the armrest as the wheels met the ground. His heart raced as he tried to steady his breathing. Never in his life had he imagined this moment. Just 2 days earlier, he'd been walking out of the warehouse with a letter of termination in his hand. Now he was stepping off a private jet, welcomed by people who treated him with more respect in a single day than his company had in years. A black car waited for him at the end of the stairs. The driver, polite and professional, opened the door and assured him that everything had been arranged. The ride was quiet, the worker staring out the window as tall buildings and shining offices passed by. He felt like a stranger in another world, a world where power and money flowed freely. Yet he also felt that he had been brought here for a reason. The car stopped in front of a tall glass building, its walls reflecting the sky. As he walked in, he was greeted warmly by staff who already knew who he was. There was no judgment in their eyes, no cold indifference. Instead, there was admiration, as if they were proud to simply welcome him through their doors. For a man who had felt invisible for so long, it was overwhelming. He was led into a spacious office with a view that stretched across the city. Behind a large desk stood the executive who had arranged it all. They crossed the room with a genuine smile and extended their hand. The worker hesitated, unsure of what to say, but the executive's grip was firm and kind. "You don't know me," the executive began, "but I know you. I saw what you did, and I was moved." The world saw a man who chose kindness when it mattered most. That is the kind of person we need in this company. The worker's throat tightened. He had expected questions, perhaps even a lecture, but instead he was met with words of gratitude and respect. The executive explained how the video had touched not only millions of ordinary people, but also leaders and decision-makers. In a world where stories of selfishness and cruelty often took center stage, his simple act of humanity had reminded everyone of what truly mattered. Then came the words that changed everything. "We want you on our team. Not because of your skills with boxes or shelves, but because of who you are. People like you make a difference. And we want to build with people like that." The worker's eyes burned with emotion. He had always thought of himself as ordinary, just a man trying to feed his family. But here he was, being told that his heart, his choices, his values were worth more than any rule book. He listened as they offered him a new position, one that paid more than he had ever earned, one that gave him the chance to grow, and one where his humanity would be celebrated, not punished. For a moment, he struggled to find his voice. Finally, with tears in his eyes, he whispered, "I just did what anyone should do." The executive smiled softly. "That's exactly why we want you." Later that evening, as he flew back home on the same jet, he thought about everything that had happened. The warehouse, the firing, the hopelessness, the video, the calls. And now this new opportunity. It all felt like a dream. But it was real. His children would no longer have to worry about food on the table. His partner would no longer have to stay up at night calculating bills. And most importantly, he could hold his head high, knowing that he had not been punished for kindness after all. He had been rewarded. When the jet landed and he stepped off, his family ran toward him. They hugged him tightly, asking what had happened. He looked at them with a smile brighter than they had ever seen and said, "Everything has changed." He explained the offer, the respect he had been given, and how his choice to help had opened a door none of them had expected. That night, their small home was filled with laughter and joy. Neighbors came by, curious about the cars and the attention, and he shared only the simplest version of the story. He didn't brag, he didn't boast. He simply said, "Sometimes the right thing costs you something at first. But in the end, kindness always finds its way back to you." The days that followed brought more news articles, more messages, and more support. But for him, the greatest reward was not the job, the jet, or the money. It was the lesson that his children had learned by watching it all unfold. They had seen their father lose everything for doing the right thing, only to be lifted higher than ever because of it. And that, he thought, was the true gift he could leave them, the belief that no act of kindness is ever wasted. As he sat with his family, looking out the window at the quiet night sky, he felt a peace he had not known in years. His life had changed in ways he could never have imagined, all because he chose to follow his heart instead of a rule book. And in that moment, he knew one thing for certain: sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can lead to the biggest changes, not just in one life, but in the world.